He walked into the lobby like any other guest, calm, dressed sharp, confirmation email in hand. But within minutes, the front desk had called security, questioned his presence, and hinted his kind didn't belong there. Not because of his behavior, not because of his booking, because of the color of his skin. What followed wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a public humiliation that played out in front of dozens of silent witnesses, each one choosing to either look away or silently agree. They didn't know who he was. They didn't ask. They just saw him, judged him, and decided he couldn't possibly be someone who deserved a suite in a place like this. But what they didn't know was that the man they dismissed, the man they nearly dragged out of the hotel, was about to flip the entire power dynamic upside down. And when the truth finally came out, no one in that lobby, especially the ones who thought they were in control, would ever forget the moment they realized exactly who they had tried to silence. This is not just a story, it's a reckoning. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and stay until the very end, because the twist in this one is something you'll never see coming. The Sterling Grand Hotel pulsed with quiet luxury as twilight descended over the skyline. Warm lighting spilled across gleaming marble floors, and the soft clink of cutlery echoed from the nearby restaurant. Behind the reception desk, Rachel Fairchild stood in pristine uniform, her posture confident, expression composed, and eyes sharp from years spent distinguishing high-value clients from unnecessary complications. At 6:04 p.m., a man stepped through the revolving doors. Tall, black, mid-40s, with a calm demeanor and an understated navy suit, he carried a leather laptop bag and moved with deliberate ease toward the front desk. Rachel observed him as she would a weather forecast, calculating, detached. He arrived at her station and with a simple greeting gave his name, Elijah Brooks. She responded with practiced efficiency, typing quickly into the system before pausing, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. She glanced back at him and politely informed him that there was no reservation under that name. Elijah nodded once, calm, then pulled out his phone and showed a confirmation email from the hotel's own corporate address, complete with a booking code, payment receipt, and timestamp. Rachel's smile was courteous but chilled. She glanced over it, then remarked how fake bookings had become increasingly sophisticated and how third-party scams often trick people. Elijah gently pointed to the email domain. It was the hotel's own, and offered to forward it to the desk. Rachel gave him the front desk email, and within seconds, it landed in her inbox. Still, she leaned back and said the system had final authority, and without matching records, she could not proceed. She suggested that he wait at the cafe corner while she escalated the issue. Elijah remained steady. He said he'd prefer to wait there at the desk. Rachel gave a small nod and turned away, already distracted by the couple behind him. White, early 30s, carrying luxury brand shopping bags and laughing about dinner reservations. The man in the suit stood silent, arms loosely at his side, gaze unfixed. Behind him, murmurs started. A woman whispered to her husband. A teenager pulled out a phone to scroll, glancing up occasionally. Rachel began drafting an internal ticket for the reservations team, but didn't mention the guest's name aloud. She looked back at Elijah briefly and found him watching, not angrily, not pleading, simply observing. There was a tension in the moment, not loud or aggressive, but dense, pressing. She asked again whether he might wait somewhere more comfortable. He declined. She adjusted her blazer, sat straighter, and began typing faster. The luxury scent of the hotel, leather, oak, and faint lavender, hung in the air, yet it couldn't mask the unease beginning to creep into the space. Elijah checked his watch once, then locked his phone screen and returned it to his pocket. Rachel printed something off a backup terminal, pretended to compare it to the reservation, then shook her head lightly. She told him kindly, but firmly, that if his name wasn't in the system, there was nothing further she could do without management clearance. She mentioned how guests sometimes use manipulated confirmation documents and how this situation was not uncommon. Elijah said nothing. A bellhop lingered by the concierge desk, watching. Another staff member walked by slowly, glancing toward the scene, sensing the discomfort without knowing its roots. Still, no one spoke. Rachel typed again. Her fingers hesitated over the keys. She looked once more at the man who still stood with quiet patience, and somewhere behind her polished professionalism was a flicker of irritation. He wasn't causing a scene, wasn't raising his voice, wasn't fitting the mold she had mentally drawn the moment he stepped through the door. But still, she found herself resisting. She told herself she was following procedure, maintaining standards, protecting the hotel's reputation from possible embarrassment. Elijah adjusted his sleeve, then stood still once more. A guest seated across the lobby watched with interest. The pianist near the lounge transitioned to a slower, more pensive melody. The front desk printer spat out a page. Rachel grabbed it, glanced, then discarded it. The system still hadn't updated, she claimed. At that moment, a sharp chime echoed from Rachel's computer. An internal memo had just been sent to all department heads. Elijah's name was at the top, but Rachel, lost in her rhythm of control, didn't check it. Rachel smiled politely at the woman, then turned to Elijah with a placid face that masked the tightening behind her eyes. "I'm sure you understand," she said coolly. "We have protocols in place. When a reservation can't be verified, we are required to take precautionary steps." Elijah, still calm, simply responded, "I've provided confirmation, forwarded it to your own system, and it's been nearly 15 minutes. Rachel folded her hands neatly on the counter, voice still dipped in sweetness. "I completely understand, but without your name in our system, I cannot continue to engage. For your own comfort, you should consider alternative accommodations." Before Elijah could respond, two uniformed hotel security staff appeared from the service corridor. Tall, matching navy blazers, radios clipped at the waist. They approached slowly, scanning the space, then locked onto the standoff at the front desk. Rachel gestured toward Elijah as one might indicate a misplaced suitcase. "Gentlemen, could you please escort this guest outside while we complete our internal check?" Her tone was light, formal, as if the situation required no real explanation. One guard stepped forward, eyes on Elijah. "Sir, we've been asked to assist you. We need you to come with us, for now." Elijah looked at them, then back at Rachel. A pause passed, long enough for the people nearby to sense the tension thickening. He reached into his jacket again, not abruptly, and pulled out his printed reservation. "I've already provided proof. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't broken any rule. Are you asking me to leave because of a system glitch or something else?" The taller guard shifted his weight, uncertain, clearly not briefed on details. Rachel, however, stepped in. "We do not need to escalate this," she said sharply, voice louder than before, catching the attention of a few guests lounging near the lobby bar. "We maintain standards here, and when things don't align, we act accordingly." Elijah remained steady. "So you're saying I don't align?" Rachel didn't answer directly. She turned her attention to the security team. "Please escort him outside. We'll follow up if the reservation is ever validated." The taller guard hesitated. One of the assistant managers, Greg Miller, a soft-spoken man known for handling late-night disputes with care, walked out from the side office after noticing the incident from surveillance. He stepped forward, brows furrowed. "Rachel, what's going on here?" Rachel didn't flinch. "This gentleman claims he has a reservation, but nothing appears in our system. He's insisted on remaining here despite having no valid booking. I followed procedure and called for assistance." Greg looked at Elijah, then at the monitor, then back at Rachel. "Did you check for manual confirmations or update flags?" He had a tone that suggested he didn't enjoy being pulled into something so publicly sensitive. Rachel's reply was brisk. "I followed protocol." Greg leaned slightly toward the monitor. "Let me check it myself." Rachel blocked his view with a step to the left. "Greg, I've got it under control. It's being escalated." He raised his hands lightly, just trying to help. But the brief interaction was noticed by Elijah, who clocked not just the words, but the choreography, the way Rachel moved, the need to control, the dismissal of backup. Greg stood awkwardly, sensing he was being shut out. The guards now looked more unsure than ever. Elijah turned to them, voice still even. I came here to check into a room I booked. I've done everything correctly. You've seen no aggression. If you remove me now, you're doing so under assumptions, not policy." Rachel cut in, voice sharpening. "Sir, you are disrupting our service. Please respect our space and exit until further notice." Elijah didn't move. He glanced at Greg. "This how your team handles guests who don't look the part?" Rachel immediately interjected. "That has nothing to do with this. You're making assumptions." Elijah's expression didn't change, but his eyes locked with hers. "Am I?" A hush fell across the lobby. The woman who'd been waiting behind Elijah suddenly stepped out of line, tugging her suitcase toward another agent. A man seated nearby stood up and slowly walked to the elevator without checking in. Rachel was aware of the shifting atmosphere, of eyes watching now, but she'd gone too far to back down. She turned once more to security. "Please assist this gentleman outside so we may continue assisting other guests." The guard stepped forward, though slower now. Greg started to speak again, but Rachel's glare halted him. Elijah slowly stepped back, one foot behind the other, and raised his hands lightly in mock surrender. "Fine," he said. "I'll step out. I've done nothing wrong, and this will be handled. You'll see." His voice was calm, but something in the way he spoke carried certainty, not threat. Rachel forced a smile. "Thank you for your cooperation." Elijah turned and walked toward the main doors, trailed closely by the two guards. The doors spun slowly as he exited into the evening light, and inside a chill remained. A moment later, Greg walked to Rachel's terminal, typed a quick override, and blinked at what he saw. The reservation had been there for several minutes, just flagged for executive clearance. His face went pale. "Rachel," he said carefully. His name just appeared. The lobby had settled again, conversations returning to casual tones, and Rachel made a note in the guest log as if the interaction had been a routine misunderstanding. At the next opportunity, during a scheduled staff rotation, she stepped into the employee lounge tucked just behind the concierge office. The room was modest compared to the rest of the building: plastic chairs, coffee-stained counter, and a vending machine that whirred intermittently. But it served as a private sanctuary where hierarchy dissolved and candid conversations emerged. Inside, Max, one of the evening bellhops, sat scrolling through his phone with one leg crossed over the other. He looked up as Rachel entered and offered a lazy grin. "Everything okay out there?" he asked, sensing residual tension clinging to her movements. Rachel set down her clipboard and poured lukewarm coffee into a disposable cup. "Just another fraud case," she said with a smirk. "Guy came in claiming he had a reservation for the top suite. Had an email and a printed sheet, but nothing in the system. Probably faked it with one of those online generators. You know how they are." Max raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "He gave you trouble?" Rachel shook her head. "Not really. Too calm for his own good." "That kind of calm? It's either arrogance or rehearsed. Probably figured we'd fold once he started acting composed, like he belonged. But I've seen that act too many times." From the hallway, Jenna, a junior concierge assistant, poked her head in and leaned against the doorframe. "Are you talking about that man earlier? The tall one in the blue suit?" Rachel glanced over. "Yeah, the one who thought a confirmation email was enough to get into our suites. He had the look, I'll admit, neat, polished, knew what to say. But there was something off. Just didn't feel like he fit the place." Jenna frowned slightly, her expression unreadable. "I saw the guards walk him out. Thought it seemed harsh." Rachel sipped her coffee, unfazed. "You think harsh, I think decisive. We can't let just anyone walk in with a screenshot and take a suite worth more than most people's rent. That's how standards drop." Max chuckled. "Yeah. Imagine showing up to a place like this with a coupon and attitude." Jenna didn't laugh, but she didn't respond either. Rachel continued, voice lowering into a tone more intimate, conspiratorial. "I've had this job long enough to recognize who our real guests are. They come with their own presence. You can feel it. This guy? He was trying too hard to look effortless. That's the tell." Max nodded. "Right. Real money doesn't need to announce itself." Rachel smiled, as if she'd been validated. Exactly. He carried himself like he wanted to be mistaken for one of them. But the shoes? A bit too practical. The watch? Mid-tier brand. Suit? Clean, but off the rack. The confidence was borrowed. The calmness was a tactic. They try to blend in by being understated, but we see it. Jenna leaned off the doorframe and walked in slowly, her arms crossed. You ever think maybe that's the point? Maybe someone doesn't want to be recognized. Rachel's smile faded slightly. We can't run a hotel on guesses, Jenna. Our clientele expect discretion, yes, but they also expect us to filter. They pay for certainty, not potential. Max changed the subject, sensing the tension. So what happens if his name does show up later? Rachel shrugged. Won't be the first time someone tried to game the system. If it was legit, we'll process a refund or send an apology. But my gut says no. He didn't belong. She said it with finality, as if the matter were already buried. The pride in her voice wasn't subtle. It carried weight. To her, protecting the hotel's image meant guarding the boundary between perception and access. The lounge buzzed briefly with silence before Jenna left the room without a word. Rachel didn't notice or didn't care. She felt affirmed, in control, having navigated another situation where her instincts had preserved the sanctity of the brand. Her view of Elijah wasn't just a snap judgment, it was a philosophy. She believed she was defending more than a hotel. She was preserving a tiered reality where image dictated privilege. Moments later, the operations supervisor entered the lounge, clipboard in hand. Rachel, he said, looking up from the sheet, you processed a walkout earlier? Rachel looked up. Yes. Gentleman with questionable credentials. I logged it. The supervisor flipped through the papers. Just so you know, the guest in question was on the executive booking list. System error flagged it for internal review, but the reservation was valid. Paid in full. Top-tier suite. Rachel blinked, her composure shifting by a fraction. Seriously? The supervisor nodded. Seriously. He's not just any guest either. I'd recommend you follow up with management. Discreetly. Rachel's posture stiffened. Her hand tightened around the coffee cup. She glanced at Max, who raised both brows in silence. Thanks, she said curtly. The supervisor nodded and exited. She refreshed the reservation system, saw Elijah's name listed clearly under an executive hold, and still minimized the window with a frustrated exhale. She thought maybe it was a back-end mistake. Maybe someone booked on his behalf and forgot to link the name. Maybe this was still salvageable. But deep down, a voice began to ask the question she had avoided. What if I was wrong? Outside, the city had dimmed under the early night sky, and the marble floors reflected the amber lights of the chandeliers above. Rachel straightened her blazer, plastered a smile on her face, and turned toward the next guest. Before she could speak, the spinning glass doors opened again, and Elijah Brooks stepped back into the lobby. His return was unhurried, posture as composed as it had been before, but his presence carried weight now that the room felt more prepared to notice. He walked past the velvet lounge, past the whispering tables, and returned to the same spot at the front desk. Rachel's heart skipped just once, but she masked it beneath a practiced expression of surprise. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and tapped a few times, then turned the screen to her. The same confirmation, same timestamp, same corporate email, same itinerary. All of it precise and legitimate. His tone was level measured. I believe you'll want to verify this again. Rachel's mouth was dry, but her response was automatic. Sir, as I explained earlier, your name was not appearing in the system. The confirmation may look valid, but we have processes to prevent fraudulent entries. Elijah did not react with frustration or sarcasm. He said only, I suggest you escalate this to someone authorized. I've already waited once. Rachel bristled. A small audience had begun to gather around the check-in lines, some guests stepping aside to observe without being too obvious. She felt their eyes, felt the unease begin to resurface, but she clung to the justification that had guided her actions. Our managers are currently occupied with a private event. I'll be happy to leave another message for you. But until then, I must ask you to remain patient." Elijah did not move. "I'd prefer you call now," he said quietly. Rachel flinched slightly. That tone, it wasn't aggressive, but it was deliberate. And it didn't ask. It required. She shifted her weight, then glanced to the security desk nearby. The same 2 guards from earlier stood ready, watching. She gave a small signal. One of them nodded and began walking toward the front desk. Rachel's voice rose slightly, just enough to project authority. "Sir, I must now formally request that you not obstruct our guest services. If you continue to remain here after being asked to wait elsewhere, we'll be required to take appropriate action." Elijah blinked slowly. "I'm standing in the lobby of a hotel I booked, waiting for confirmation of a service I paid for." "You're escalating a non-issue," Rachel responded sharply. "This is a matter of procedure and staff safety." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Safety?" Rachel, feeling the heat of eyes on her, stood straighter. When a guest refuses to comply with reasonable directions and repeatedly returns to the property without valid check-in clearance, it becomes a concern. The word concern echoed louder than expected. It triggered whispers nearby. A woman in a red coat leaned closer to her husband. The pianist in the lounge stopped playing briefly, then restarted, slower now. The security guard reached the desk and looked from Rachel to Elijah. "Is there an issue?" Rachel nodded curtly. "The guest was previously escorted out. He has returned and is now requesting access despite ongoing verification." The guard turned to Elijah. "Sir, I need you to step aside with me while we sort this." Elijah looked directly at the guard. "I will step aside once management is contacted. Until then, I'm not leaving." The tension cracked open. Rachel leaned forward slightly and spoke with authority sharpened by pride and anxiety. "If he refuses to comply, contact the police." The words came out faster than she had meant them, but now they hung in the air like smoke. The entire lobby seemed to pause. The security guard hesitated. He looked again at Elijah, then back at Rachel. "Are you sure you want to do that?" Rachel nodded once. The radio crackled softly as the guard stepped aside and pressed a button on his walkie-talkie. Elijah stood motionless. Not a muscle shifted, not an ounce of panic. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The weight of the moment now rested on Rachel. Guests began to murmur louder. A couple walked up to the counter and turned away, choosing to wait for another clerk. Greg, the assistant manager, appeared again, having been notified by a back-office staff who heard the radio call. He stepped in quickly, voice low and direct. "What's happening?" Rachel turned to him. "He's refusing to leave." Greg looked at Elijah, then at the monitor behind Rachel. His eyes scanned the screen. He froze. Then he looked at Rachel. "You called the police on a confirmed guest." His voice was a whisper, but the words struck like thunder. Rachel stammered, "I didn't see it before." The update came after he left. "I was following protocol." Greg shook his head. "This reservation was flagged for priority clearance 3 hours ago. He's an executive tier guest." The screen says it clearly. Elijah stood still, not looking at either of them. Guests, having witnessed the confrontation from their lounge chairs, tabletops, and check-in lines, leaned toward each other, exchanging thoughts not in full voice, but in sharp glances and lowered tones that carried far more judgment than compassion. An older man in a beige trench coat, who had been sipping scotch at the corner bar, stood slowly and approached the front desk with deliberate ease. He addressed Greg, ignoring Elijah entirely, and said, "You can't be too careful these days. Protocols exist for a reason." It's good she was thorough. Greg's brow furrowed slightly, but he remained professional. Elijah stood beside them, hands folded calmly in front of him, showing no visible reaction, but his stillness seemed to irritate the man, who added, "Nothing against the gentleman, of course, but standards are what keep places like this from falling apart." Behind him, a woman in a pearl gray coat whispered to her friend, "He should have just waited outside like she asked. Pushing for attention like that, it just looks bad." Her friend nodded, murmuring something about entitlement, then gestured toward the concierge desk, as if signaling a desire to distance themselves from the moment entirely. A young couple nearby, seated on a velvet love seat, pulled their designer bags closer, as if the incident might suddenly become contagious. One of them muttered, "This isn't the place for that kind of drama." Elijah remained still, his expression unreadable. He had heard it all before, just never this loud, never this close, never this precisely orchestrated by people pretending they hadn't noticed him. Rachel, now quiet behind the desk, typed absently into the reservation log, her eyes avoiding the monitor entirely. She heard their voices. She heard their defense. She felt a strange wave of relief, as though the blame being displaced onto Elijah somehow softened her own. One guest, a woman in her early 50s wearing a sharp navy suit, approached him directly. She gave a polite smile, the kind designed to sound helpful while remaining condescending. "Sir, there's a lovely boutique hotel just 2 blocks over," she said lightly. "They might have something available tonight if this place is too complicated." Greg opened his mouth to respond, but Elijah raised one hand gently, stopping him. He looked the woman in the eye, gave a small, courteous nod, and said, "Thank you for the suggestion. I'll manage here." His voice was calm, firm, and inarguable. The woman's smile flickered, then dissolved as she stepped back without another word. A group of men in tailored suits, sitting near the far window, exchanged amused glances. One whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Corporate class at its finest. Walks in like he owns the place." The sarcasm in his voice was sharp, intended to land. Rachel's fingers froze on her keyboard. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she didn't say a word. She let the noise of the lobby blur over her. The pianist played on, but even the melody had changed, now drifting into slower, uncertain progressions. A teenage guest, sitting near a potted palm with her phone out, recorded a portion of the scene, panning between the bystanders and the front desk. She whispered into the microphone, "Guy just got accused of trespassing. Turns out he's the real guest. This place is wild." Her words would later be uploaded with hashtags that echoed louder than any corporate statement. Greg attempted to regain order, speaking to the crowd with practiced diplomacy. "The issue has been resolved. Mr. Brooks is indeed a confirmed guest. We appreciate everyone's patience." But his voice fell flat, as though resolution were an afterthought. No one had been waiting for truth. They had already chosen their version. Elijah turned toward the elevators, finally stepping away from the front desk. Greg offered to escort him personally, but Elijah waved him off politely. The walk across the lobby felt longer than it was. Each step echoed in marble stillness, not because of sound, but because of how many eyes tracked him. He didn't rush. He didn't slouch. He didn't retaliate. He simply moved forward like a man who had walked this path before. And he had. Not in this exact hotel, not in this exact suit, not under these lights, but in countless spaces where presence alone was mistaken for disruption. A few feet from the elevator bank, he paused and glanced back, not at Rachel, not at the guests, but at the silence itself. The kind of silence that comes when people realize they were watching something they helped create. A quiet built not from neutrality, but from complicity. The reservation for Elijah Brooks was still open on the screen, glowing faintly in soft blue and gold, a clear indicator of top-tier status and executive override. Her eyes skimmed over it again, unwilling to absorb what it meant. Greg had already returned to the side office, speaking quietly on the phone, likely explaining the situation to someone above his pay grade. He had offered to make things right, but Rachel knew what that meant. Appease the guest, patch the moment, and move on. A few guests trickled through the lobby, choosing not to linger where discomfort still hung in the air. Then came footsteps, measured, steady, and a man emerged from the elevator hallway. His name was David Langford, the night operations manager, a man known more for smoothing over chaos than confronting it. Dressed in a charcoal suit with a silver pocket square, he exuded the kind of authority that came from decades of managing other people's mistakes. He approached Rachel with a clipboard in hand, his expression unreadable. "Let's not let this become larger than it needs to be," he said calmly, setting the clipboard down and pulling up Elijah's profile on the second monitor. I'll have our accounting team issue a full refund and offer him complimentary accommodation elsewhere. Discreet transport. Apology in writing. You'll send the message. Keep it courteous but firm. Tell him we regret the inconvenience and have arranged alternate arrangements for his comfort." Rachel nodded, not because she agreed, but because she didn't know what else to do. "He already went upstairs," she said. The elevator took him up to the suite. David frowned. He shouldn't have. "We can't have him staying here, not after what just happened. He'll expect more than what we can deliver now. The attention's already snowballing. Best to relocate him, call an upgrade, and sweep it quietly." She hesitated. "He hasn't asked to leave." David looked at her directly. "He won't. That's the thing. He'll stay and let the moment fester. Then it will escalate. Blogs, legal teams, corporate affairs. I've seen it before. We get ahead of it by appearing generous." Rachel nodded again. She opened the messaging client and began typing a formal apology email. But halfway through, her screen flashed. A new notification pinged at the bottom corner, marked urgent. She clicked without thinking. It was an internal company dispatch directed to regional management and key site personnel. The subject line was simple but jarring. "Urgent executive arrival and private meeting request priority. Level 1. Her breath caught in her throat. The name listed below the subject line struck her with the precision of a bullet. Elijah Brooks. The memo detailed that Mr. Elijah Brooks, listed as chair of holding strategy and primary shareholder representative, would be arriving at the Sterling Grand to oversee internal performance evaluation. It ordered immediate discretion, hospitality alignment, and coordination with the hotel's general management for a private debrief session. The signature came from the global corporate office, an executive order from the top. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she read it again. She read it 3 more times, her mind refusing to absorb what it meant. Elijah wasn't just a premium guest. He wasn't just a wealthy client. He was the owner, or at least one of the most powerful figures behind the curtain. And he had walked into her lobby, handed her evidence, stood with composure, endured humiliation, and said nothing. Until now. She looked over at David, who was still instructing another staff member to contact a town car service. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "David, you need to read this." He took one look at the screen and froze. The silence between them became heavier than anything they had felt earlier that day. "This can't be right," he muttered. Rachel only responded with a shallow breath. David took the mouse and began reading the memo himself. As he did, his jaw slowly tensed, and his hand dropped from the mouse like it had burned him. "Do not attempt to relocate him," he said sharply. "Do not contact him. Cancel the driver. Do not do anything unless you're told directly." Rachel sat back, stunned. She watched as David turned and marched away with his phone pressed to his ear, his tone urgent now, no longer calm. She didn't know what exactly was coming, but she knew it was no longer hers to control. She minimized the memo, opened Elijah's profile again, and stared at the image attached to his corporate file. It was him, unmistakably, a candid photo taken at a leadership conference, standing beside executives, smiling warmly beneath a banner that bore the very name of the hotel brand she thought she was protecting. Her mind circled one name over and over, like a bell tolling from somewhere deep inside her. Elijah Brooks. It no longer sounded like a guest's name. It sounded like a verdict. Every motion she made felt fragile now, like moving through thin glass. The image of Elijah's corporate profile still lingered in her mind. That warm, confident smile he wore beside corporate board members, the executive lanyard draped over his neck, the conference logo that she had once bragged about attending in her cover letter years ago. Her fingers drifted across the keyboard again, but her screen remained untouched. In the office across the hall, David barked short commands into his phone, his voice muffled by the door but sharp in tone, filled with urgency. She had never seen him speak like that. She suspected he had never imagined he would be in this position, scrambling to reposition reality after it had already taken shape without permission. Then the black SUV pulled up. It wasn't the kind typically used for airport pickups or visiting clients. It was larger, sleeker, with tinted windows that reflected the city lights like obsidian. It came to a gentle stop directly in front of the revolving doors, engine purring low like a restrained growl. The bellman moved first, adjusting his gloves and straightening his tie before he approached the vehicle. The rear passenger door opened with controlled slowness, and a man in a gray suit stepped out first, tall, sharp, and unmistakably a corporate liaison. In his hand, he held a small black folio, and his steps were brisk but measured. He said nothing as he crossed the marble entrance, pushing through the glass doors. His presence alone brought a hush over the lobby again. Rachel straightened without thinking. Her hands moved to adjust her name tag, but her fingers trembled. She looked up as the liaison arrived at the desk and asked calmly for the manager on duty. She didn't speak. She couldn't. David appeared a moment later, his tie slightly askew, expression tight. "I'm David Langford. How can I?" The liaison opened the folio, removed a letter bearing the hotel chain's corporate crest, and handed over. "Mr. Elijah Brooks has arrived to conduct the initial executive review of this property," he said without a hint of tension. "He requests all senior staff be present in the executive lounge within 10 minutes. David's face didn't move, but his eyes shifted slightly toward Rachel. "He's already checked in," David said slowly. "He arrived earlier." The liaison nodded. "He's aware." The words held more weight than their simplicity suggested. Then the doors behind them turned again. Elijah stepped through, no longer in his modest navy suit, but now dressed in a dark tailored ensemble that gleamed subtly under the lobby lights. His posture hadn't changed, still upright, still composed. But now the perception had shifted. Now people stood straighter as he passed. Now heads turned not out of suspicion, but of recognition. And this time, he was not alone. Another assistant followed closely behind him, tapping quietly on a tablet, while a third member of his team flanked his opposite side, carrying a slim briefcase. The trio moved like a wave, smooth, coordinated, unstoppable. Rachel felt her breath catch. The guests who had earlier whispered now stared, most unaware of the unfolding drama, but intuitively sensing the presence of someone above their tier. Elijah said nothing as he passed the front desk. He didn't glance at Rachel. He didn't pause. He moved with the certainty of someone who no longer needed to prove his place. He crossed the lobby, past the lounge, and disappeared through the doors of the executive wing, leaving behind only the trail of stunned silence. David turned toward Rachel. "Prepare the team," he said flatly. "Everyone's senior. Now." Rachel nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. As she walked toward the staff room, she heard murmurs rise again, this time confused. "Isn't that the guy they were talking to earlier?" one guest said to another. "That's the same man from earlier today, right? Why is the staff suddenly on alert?" The questions came faster now, but no one had answers. Because the truth hadn't fully landed yet. Because the weight of it was still descending, inch by inch. Now they were just seats holding nervous posture. David Langford sat nearest to him, eyes lowered slightly, his usual calm replaced by a tightly composed remorse. Rachel sat further down the table, hands locked together in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. The executive liaison stood behind Elijah, reading from a thin tablet that documented the day's events in alarming detail, timestamps, guest reports, discrepancies between staff responses and system data. Each item revealed not just error, but a pattern. Then Elijah spoke. "Before I continue, I'd like the surveillance footage from the main lobby reviewed now. The interaction from today, beginning at 4:56. His voice wasn't loud, but the stillness in the room amplified every word. David glanced at the AV technician stationed at the side of the room. The technician, already briefed, nodded and tapped the control pad. The lights dimmed slightly, and the large wall-mounted screen flickered to life. A timestamp appeared, 4:56 p.m. The footage rolled forward in silence. The room watched as Elijah appeared on screen, standing calmly in front of the reception desk. His voice wasn't audible yet, but the closed caption transcription populated the bottom of the screen. Rachel's image appeared, her expression polite at first, then skeptical, then subtly dismissive. The subtitles matched the memory precisely. "There's no reservation under that name. Are you sure it was booked through us?" The video continued. Elijah displayed his email. Rachel leaned forward, looked at the screen, then said, "Unfortunately, we've seen people try this before. I can't proceed without confirmation." There was a pause, then another line. "You're welcome to wait in the cafe. It's more flexible there." A ripple went through the room. Elijah remained silent. The others didn't dare speak. The screen advanced. Rachel called security. Her tone elevated. The dialogue displayed her words in stark contrast to the quiet image on screen. "He's not matching any record, and he won't leave the desk. I need him removed before he disrupts the space." A new timestamp. 5:15 p.m. The footage now showed Elijah being escorted toward the doors. The bellhop watching nearby. Guests looking away or staring openly. Rachel turning back to her computer, satisfied. The screen paused there. The silence in the room was louder than any voice. Then the video resumed. It now showed Elijah returning, his demeanor unchanged, showing further proof. The screen captured Rachel raising her hand toward security again. The subtitle came in bold. "Contact police if necessary. He's refusing to comply." The footage ended. The screen went black. For a moment, no one moved. Elijah turned toward David. "How many of these interactions go unreported because the guest doesn't have a platform? Because they're not wearing a suit with a signature worth 7 figures?" His voice was not angry. It was deliberate, like a man polishing a truth until it could no longer be ignored. "This one was recorded, documented, and you saw it. But how many others begin and end at a desk where perception becomes protocol?" David swallowed once and opened his mouth to respond, but Elijah raised a hand. "Not yet." The liaison stepped forward and handed Rachel a printed document. She took it without looking up. "You are being placed under immediate review," he said. "Pending outcome, your duties are suspended." Rachel nodded. Her face had no fight left in it. Elijah didn't gloat. He didn't glare. He merely returned his focus to the room. "This property is one of many that will undergo structural audit, not just for logistics, for culture." He turned back to David. "You're expected to submit a revised hiring and training model within 1 month. And that model must begin here with accountability." Before the meeting concluded, another voice came from the hallway. A group of regional directors had arrived. Their flight had been expedited. Now they stood lined at the doorway, expression somber. The regional president stepped forward, greeted Elijah by name, and expressed regret. "What happened here wasn't just failure. It was an exposure, and we thank you for not choosing silence." Elijah nodded, but said nothing more. Outside the lounge, the lobby buzzed quietly with guests who had begun piecing the story together. A few whispers spread like wildfire across phones. A local news anchor, who happened to be on site for a charity gala, heard the full report from a staff member and had already begun drafting a press alert. Within an hour, a statement would be released by corporate confirming that Mr. Elijah Brooks had exercised his executive authority to open a formal investigation into internal operations at the Sterling Grand and its sister properties. The statement was measured, factual, but undeniable. Rachel was suspended pending a deeper investigation, but she was not the only name attached to the internal review. Brad Mallory, the assistant front desk supervisor who had not directly addressed Elijah, but had actively supported Rachel's initial assumptions, was called into the Human Resources office less than an hour after the video review ended. His attitude was defensive at first. He claimed he had followed the chain of command. He argued that he hadn't said anything personally offensive, that he merely acted on the information provided by a senior colleague. But the committee listening to him had already reviewed multiple internal chat logs from the staff system, including one message where Brad had typed during the incident, "He doesn't belong here." Just another fake suit with a printed page. That one line was enough to erase the protection of plausible deniability. Brad's employment was terminated by the end of the day. But the true consequences began when the story made its way online. A short clip from the security footage, muted but clear, leaked onto a social media platform. It was the moment Rachel turned away from Elijah and gestured to security. The caption read, "Man shows proof. Hotel seizes skin." Within hours, it had been shared over 200,000 times. Hashtags exploded across timelines. Hashtag Elijah Brooks trended in multiple regions, accompanied by calls for transparency, corporate accountability, and systemic reform in hospitality. It wasn't just a story now. It was a symbol. And symbols travel further than reports ever could. Brad's name surfaced quickly. A former coworker mentioned him in a now viral thread. Screenshots of internal messages he had sent over the years, some mocking guests for their appearance, others riddled with veiled bias, surfaced like debris rising after a shipwreck. Journalists picked up the story within 24 hours. They contacted his alma mater, his previous employers, even his family's small business listed on an old LinkedIn post. He deactivated all his profiles, but the screenshots remained. The digital ink had already dried. Then came the moment that stripped him of whatever veneer of stability he had left. His girlfriend, a school counselor known for her advocacy in equal opportunity education, ended their relationship publicly, citing a profound difference in values. Her short statement was shared across networks as a message of personal accountability. Brad read it alone in his apartment, surrounded by boxed memories of a future that had, just days earlier, felt untouchable. Meanwhile, Sterling Grand released a formal statement, co-signed by the chain's CEO and Elijah Brooks himself. It opened without euphemism. "We failed to uphold the values we claim to represent." The message acknowledged the incident, confirmed the suspension of involved staff, and announced a mandatory retraining initiative across all properties under the brand's name. The new training modules would be co-developed with external equity consultants, and each location would undergo quarterly culture audits for the next 3 years. The public reacted with cautious optimism. Some commended the steps, others called it performative. But Elijah's presence in the announcement gave it gravity. He didn't speak in corporate platitudes. Instead, he offered a measured reflection. This isn't about punishing individuals. It's about exposing patterns. And patterns require systemic correction. His image, calm, direct, unflinching, became the defining visual of the campaign's launch. Inside the hotel, staff morale wavered. Whispers filled break rooms, some defensive, others reflective. Rachel's absence was felt more in tension than in silence. Some sympathized, others distanced themselves, and a few questioned how they might have responded had the same situation been handed to them. But Elijah did not return to the executive lounge. He stayed in his suite, took meetings quietly, and reviewed training protocols on his own time. He never requested special treatment, never asked for apologies. He simply remained, visible but distant, like a shadow cast by truth that refused to disappear. In one quiet moment, the head of housekeeping knocked on his door with the intent of offering an apology. Elijah listened, thanked her sincerely, and told her that accountability begins with honesty, not guilt. The next day, she volunteered to lead one of the first workshops. Across the city, hospitality schools began referencing the event as a case study in unconscious bias. Leadership programs included it in their curriculum, not as a scandal, but as a transition point, an example of what happens when institutions are forced to look inward. Brad, meanwhile, relocated out of state. He found freelance work under a new alias, but the past followed him like a shadow, refusing to release its grip. Each application triggered deeper checks. Each opportunity stalled at the final interview. 12 months later, the ballroom of the downtown Civic Center was filled with rows of people, some in business attire, others in casual wear, and a few wearing the distinct gray polo shirts of the Community Equity Coalition. A banner stretched across the stage, from missteps to movement. The room pulsed with quiet energy, not the excitement of applause, but the tension of anticipation. Among the panelists seated at the front was a woman dressed in a plain navy blouse and black slacks. Her name tag read Rachel Fairchild. The spotlight did not love her, but it accepted her. And as she adjusted the microphone, there was no flash of the polished authority she once wore like armor at the front desk of the Sterling Grand. Instead, there was pause, measured breath, a hesitation that came not from fear, but the weight of reflection. She began not with excuse, but with admission. She told the room what had happened. Not just the public story, but the internal one. The thoughts she had ignored, the assumptions she had never questioned, the power she had clung to and misused. Her words were slow, deliberate. "I thought I was protecting the brand," she said. "What I was really protecting was my pride. I didn't see the guest. I saw a threat to my authority, and that blindness cost me everything I thought I'd earned." There was no anger in her tone, only clarity. She spoke of the months that followed, losing her job, losing the respect of her peers, the silence from friends who didn't know what to say, and the endless days of staring at a version of herself she no longer recognized. She spoke of job applications that never received a reply, of waking each day hoping for distraction, of therapy sessions where the mirror became more honest than her own thoughts. The audience listened, some leaning forward, others crossing arms, but all engaged. When she paused, the moderator asked her what changed. Rachel looked at the crowd and answered, "I stopped trying to defend the version of me that did it." The room was quiet again, not because it was shocked, but because it understood. After the panel, as attendees gathered near the refreshment tables and discussion groups formed in loose circles, a familiar figure approached Rachel. Elijah Brooks, dressed simply in a gray sweater and dark slacks, extended a hand. She accepted it with both of hers. There were no photographers, no media press, just two people connected by a moment that once divided them. Elijah thanked her for speaking. Rachel thanked him for not burying her. He responded, "I didn't save you. You did the hardest part yourself, facing it." He then invited her to join an initiative his foundation was piloting, one that provided coaching and accountability circles for professionals who had lost their way in systems built on exclusion. It wasn't a clean slate. It was an honest one. Rachel didn't say yes immediately. She asked questions. She took time. But 3 weeks later, she accepted. And when she walked into her first session, she wasn't a former supervisor trying to reclaim a title. She was a person rebuilding trust, one conversation at a time. Meanwhile, the hospitality group that had once employed her had completed its full audit. Dozens of outdated procedures were revised. Bias training was no longer a module, it was a foundation. Guest satisfaction scores improved, but so did employee satisfaction. And for the first time in the brand's history, its employee retention rate had increased across marginalized staff groups. Elijah remained on the board, but he delegated most day-to-day oversight to a new generation of leaders. He focused on mentorship, education, and a series of public roundtables that included voices like Rachel's, not to shame, but to show that learning was not linear. The public memory of the incident faded from headlines, but not from the hearts of those involved. It became a touchstone, a story retold in workshops, case studies, and leadership training. A story about a mistake that did not end in ruin, but in responsibility. Brad, now working at a logistics firm under supervision, declined interviews but reportedly attended a restorative justice circle facilitated by one of Elijah's programs. He never returned to hospitality, but he wrote a letter that found its way to Rachel. It did not ask for forgiveness. It simply said, "I understand now." Rachel read it once, then filed it away. She didn't need closure from him. She had found her own. One evening, months after the panel, she walked past the Sterling Grand. She did not go in. She stood across the street, watching the doorman greet guests. The marble still gleamed. The windows still shimmered. But to her, it was no longer a palace. It was a place where something hard had happened, and something good had come from it. She turned, walked away, and didn't look back. Not because she was ashamed, but because she no longer lived in that story. She had written another. The end. If this story moved you or made you think differently about justice, redemption, or second chances, consider subscribing to the channel for more powerful narratives like this one. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter. What part of the story surprised you the most? Was it the turning point in the lobby, the final confrontation, or Rachel's moment of reflection? And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from today? We'd love to hear your thoughts.